David Savage, a.k.a. Diz, and this is The Force Always.
Okay, so welcome to the show. This is, once again, the Star Wars show. Let's get on with it. Later on in the show, there will be a review for Episode 5, Season 7, The Clone Wars, which is Gone with a Trace. That's called Gone with a Trace. That's the Episode 5 for the Clone Wars review later on in the show. Let's get on with the other Star Wars news. Star Wars news is that in about just over a week's time, we'll be getting the Blu-ray DVD release of The Rise of Skywalker Episode 9. That's right. You can actually get it now on digital if you look for it. It's not on Disney Plus, but you can get it right now on digital. But in over a week's and a half's time, you'll be able to get the Blu-ray and you'll be able to get the DVD release. And in some parts of the world, it's going to be April 1. Some part of the world, it's going to be March 31. It just depends. But anyway, that's the first piece of news. Second piece of news is that the Star Wars Celebration at the moment is all clear to go. It's still a good 6 months away. I don't think you should overly worry about this thing. Whether it does get cancelled or not, we don't know, but we can only just see what unfolds. But it's, it seems to be go ahead as per usual. Anyway, so that really is the Star Wars news for this week. So now let's get into the views. Views is my story ideas within the Star Wars saga, spin-off films. It could be a poster, it could be a title, it could be anything. Star Wars stories, original to myself, not predictions, just what I would like to see happen. Anyway, so later on in the show, as I said in the review section, there's going to be a Clone Wars review on the latest episode. But in the latest episode, just a bit of a heads up, and there was a bit of a spoiler here, if you have not seen the episode, is that Ahsoka is back in this episode, and my viewpoint, which is a story idea, is that what would I like to see happen with Ahsoka from when we saw her last? Not in the Clone Wars, but in actuality storyline. So technically it was in Rebels, and it was at I think the final episode, and we saw an older sort of version of her, and at that point her story had evolved from leaving the Jedi to then, which sort of really gave a very mature and interesting thread to her storyline. I personally would like to see her live longer than the Rebels timeline point and just keep going. But I think just aging her needs to happen and sort of dulling her down, because I think the thing at the start that sort of put me off with this character was her look. It's not that bad, but it wasn't that great. It was a bit sort of almost clown-like in a sort of female way. Just, bright colours, stripes, no dots, but it could have had dots and it would have created a sensation. But I did like the character. I thought it was, it was good from the start, but I just thought its look was a bit clown-like, a little bit over the top. But I would like to see Ahsoka sort of stretch out to be a long-living Jedi, almost like Yoda, as a different species, and sort of continue that thread in her storyline further into the saga. Whatever Disney do with the stories with Star Wars that's after Episode 9, I'd like to see her character sort of just keep living on in some sort of way. It would be interesting to see somebody from very young to very old in our reality of the world years, and also the timeline of Star Wars, just to sort of see the progress. Because technically, even though we've got some old characters there like Chewbacca and Yoda, we never saw their sort of progress from almost the start to the end. in a long aged manner, that is, and Ahsoka could be a species that has a long aged way. That's what I would do. That's my story idea, is to continue her character, dull her down more, give her some age, continuing on with her wise attitude. It's great. I think she is a good character that could only get better. Anyway, that's my story idea for this time around. Let's now get into the reviews. Reviews this week is about the Clone Wars Episode 5, Gone with a Trace. Straight off the bat, 7.9 out of 10. Clone Wars is back with a good energy, interesting episode, great sort of canvas to this particular episode in its colours and its sort of location and of being in Coruscant in the darker end of the world, or the traffic end of the world, or whatever part of the world in Coruscant. That is a planet's name, and it was just good to see Ahsoka in this episode. It was good to get that introduction to the character Trace. She's a mechanic, sort of give a bit of a sort of a hard edge, sort of real to life sort of female character. Whether it's female or male, it was still very good. I didn't mind her design. The hair was probably a little bit annoying, but it was okay. But it didn't have a lot of integral part of the story. It was fun. It was good. It was a good episode. It really did move on from the first four, which was sort of getting a bit stale. It is Clone Wars, and it was Clone Wars in those 4 episodes. But it was just sort of like not really pushing forward. This one really felt like a new section of story being told, continuing from, obviously Ahsoka's departure in, I think, season 5, at the end of season 5, from what I remember. So it was definitely, it had a good energy to it. It sort of, its weakest point was probably the end, where it was sort of like, it didn't really leave you wondering massively, but just a little. Again, 7.9 out of 10. It's available on Disney Plus right now. Gone with a Trace. That's episode 5 for the Clone Wars. Anyway, that's my review for this time. Let's get into the interviews. Interviews is pretty much 2 questions were asked myself for you guys out there. The first question, because we've got this big, thing that's happening in the world at the moment, in the reality of this world, let's call it thing. It's the big C word. It's not a bad word, but in a swear word, but it's definitely a bad word at the moment. But what can you do if you have time off in a Star Wars way? Now, I know this sounds like, why would you want to do something Star Wars? But if you've got absolutely nothing to do, if you're not infected or affected by this thing that's happening in the world at the moment, what can you actually do to pass the time? Because for a lot of us, that's what's going to happen if there's some sort of lockdown. Here in Melbourne, Australia, no lockdown as yet. If that happens, we don't know as yet, but that's to be seen. But what can you do? There's 2 things that I reckon would be interesting to a hardcore Star Wars fan and just a regular Star Wars person being introduced to Star Wars. It's often said that, you should start at episode 4, A New Hope, Star Wars, to start off your movie experience within the Star Wars universe. Yes, I understand that. I agree to a certain point, but it's just sort of more promoting the whole Star Wars phenomenon. But for a hardcore Star Wars fan and a regular sort of person who's being introduced, it would be good to sort of really clear your mind and sit down, watch it from episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 in that order. Just to see how it unfolds, it would be interesting. Now, I know it would spoil some surprises to the personal self, like episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, the big classic comment. This is a bit of a spoiler to some. I don't know how many, but hopefully not many. But the I am your father moment, it would be spoiled selfishly to the person watching it. Like, If you saw Empire Strikes Back and you saw that, you'd be absolutely blown away. But to watch that moment unfold in the eyes and ears of Luke Skywalker going through that moment, because that's what it's really about. Luke going through that moment, not really the viewer. So besides moments like that to yourself, watching it from 1 to 9 would be just interesting. And that's a lot of time, but if the lockdown does go on in your part of the woods, or if it happens here in Melbourne, Australia, I don't know, there's some time you can burn and watch it from the start to the end, from the episodic order. The other thing you can do, now this would be hard because it's longer and it's a bit more, you really do need to be a bit more of a Star Wars hardcore fan, but watching The Clone Wars from start to finish, if you've never completely or not really taken it in completely, from the actual movie The Clone Wars into the very end at the moment, which is season 7, episode 5, it would be sort of a good recap and a lot of little interesting points to the whole story philosophy to Star Wars, like the pinnacle points when Anakin sort of goes through a part where he sort of sees his future self. That was a really good part of Clone Wars. How Darth Maul was reintroduced into the story in Clone Wars. Even though I agree and disagree with it, it's still good. But it would be just, interesting with a lot of time to burn. That's something else you could do. Anyway, a couple of ideas. So, my second question is, what's the hardest thing for a Star Wars fan through this big thing that's happening in the world at the moment? I know this is going to sound really ridiculous, but I reckon, including myself, it's sort of a hard thing. Not the biggest, baddest thing, it's just a stupid thing, but it's a real thing. Now, we are on the verge of getting the Blu-ray and DVD in the next week and a half. Where I'm from, there's no lockdown, there's no restrictions of that type of shopping type thing. There is restrictions in amounts you can buy, and anyway, that's whatever. But it's about a week and a half. I just wish that I can get that steelbook copy, Blu-ray of The Rise of Skywalker, and I'll just, we can rock a lockdown from that point. Wishingly. That's been me being selfish, but it's also just, that's how a Star Wars fan works. He really wants it to be first, the best, ultimate. So that's, and it's not that much of a bad or hard thing to go through. But anyway, that is probably the worst thing I can think of right now for a Star Wars fan. Besides possibly if The Mandalorian has been sort of held up because of filming and editing because of, for season 2 later on this year. I don't know. That's just me thinking if that could be. But anyway, the release of The Rise of Skywalker, whether you loved it or not, it still be great in the collection, and that's what I'm sort of waiting on for. So that's the hardest thing, but it's just a little thing, but it can be a big thing to some. Anyway, so that's really the Star Wars news, views, reviews, and interviews for this week. Subscribe to the channel. The Force Always weekly news, as I said, views, reviews, interviews, only on YouTube. You can message me with Instagram or Twitter down below. That's my addresses, or YouTube itself. But until next time, may the toilet paper be with you, or keep rocking.